Let's move to the Supreme Court now. The Senate vote to approve President Trump's Supreme Court nominee will likely take place in the next few days. Senator Shaheen, even before the debate begins in the full Senate, you've already said that you will vote against Judge Amy Coney Barrett. This will make 3 consecutive Supreme Court nominees you voted against, all nominees of President Trump. You voted in favor of 2 judges nominated by President Obama. Have you decided you'll never vote for another Supreme Court nominee put forth by a Republican president? Is this because of a litmus test that you have for that person who would need to be on the same side as you over key issues?
No, John, sadly, what we have watched under the Trump administration is nominating ever more judges with ever more extreme views on the issues that are important to the American people. We need to go back to looking at judges who have a more mainstream perspective, because what the Trump administration is doing is actually packing the court. What we've seen with Amy Coney Barrett last week during her hearings was that she doesn't support the Affordable Care Act, which is so important to so many Americans, and the Supreme Court is going to be taking up that issue next week, or the week after the election. We saw that she opposes women's reproductive rights. I mean, she even endorsed an ad from a group that would criminalize in vitro fertilization. I think that's a view that's just too extreme for the American people.
Thank you. And Mr. Messner, with the way the U.S. Senate is working now and the partisan divide, voters will likely assume that you would enter the Senate and vote yes to a Trump nominee and no to a Biden nominee. Why would they be wrong to think that you, such a strong supporter of the president, would break with the party?
Well, first of all, John, I'd like to say, unlike Amy Coney Barrett, I have notes that I've been taking. I said in a previous debate that I thought Merrick Garland should have got a hearing in the Senate and a vote in the Senate. I would evaluate judges on their temperament, their jurisprudence, their accomplishments, and I will look at each judge objectively. I think it's a huge mistake for U.S. senators to try to predict what kind of decisions a Supreme Court justice would make in the future. I think these nominees should be evaluated on their abilities. Amy Coney Barrett is an amazing choice. She's brilliant, she's accomplished, she's a great role model for women and young girls, and I think it's a mistake. If you listen to the hearings, you should have listened to what she talked about, the importance of precedents in the Supreme Court, and don't assume that she's going to overturn things.
Quick follow-up, in terms of overturning things, Senator Shaheen, if Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court and the issue of abortion is returned to the states, how would you respond in the U.S. Senate?
I think we need to look at national legislation that would essentially put into law what's in the Roe v. Wade decision. But, you know, unfortunately, my opponent is not willing to let women make their own choices on reproductive rights. He supports Amy Coney Barrett's extreme position on this issue. In fact, he has an extreme position on reproductive rights. He would oppose abortion even in cases of rape and incest. He has said that he would jail doctors who performed abortions. I think that is out of the mainstream of the values of people in New Hampshire. You know, unfortunately, my opponent is not from New Hampshire. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know my record. He doesn't know the state in the way that we need to. We need someone who can represent the views of the people of New Hampshire, who's going to work with people who, on both sides of the aisle, to make a difference for this state. That's what I've done in my years in the Senate.
Mr. Messner, we'll give you 30 seconds to respond and then a minute on Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, Senator Shaheen had the opportunity to vote to codify Roe v. Wade in the Born Alive Act, and she voted no. The Born Alive Act said if a baby survives an abortion, that baby is entitled to the same medical standard of care of anybody. She voted no. She's for passive infanticide. That is extreme. So
That
there
is
was an
exactly
opportunity.
wrong.
There was
My
an
opponent
opportunity.
is not
there-
correct on that.
There's an
We already
opportunity. There's an
outlaw
opportunity
infanticide
for
as
you
we
to
should
vote
because
in a
it
way
is
that was
wrong.
consistent with Roe v. Wade.
You're wrong.
You had an opportunity to vote in a way that's
My
consistent
opponent
with Roe
can't make
v.
up his
Wade.
facts.
Senator, let's let Mr. Mesner
He
finish.
is wrong on that.
Mr. Mesner, please finish your point.
Can I start over?
Just make your point, please.
So the Born Alive Act, Senator Shaheen voted no. The Born Alive Act is designed to prevent passive infanticide. And in Roe v. Wade, passive infanticide is not permitted.
Senator Shaheen, 30 seconds to respond.
The legislation that he's talking about would have put into law what is already illegal, and that is infanticide. But it would have gone beyond that. It would have jailed doctors who would perform abortions. Again, that's what my opponent supports. That's outside of the mainstream of New Hampshire values. See, there's a difference between my opponent and me. He thinks government should make decisions about what women do. I think women, in consultation with their doctors, with their families, should make decisions about their own reproductive health. That's a very big difference between my opponent and me.
That's time.